Hi everyone, Jeremy here from Flatware Creations. This is what we're making today, a hair clip. I'm using 2 silver plated serving forks. So I've already got the shape here. I did some experimenting. These have been bent flat maybe 4 or 5 times now. This was my first plan, was to use some brass tubing and the spring and solder them together and run a bar through them, a brass bar. But that didn't work. So I had to take it apart, and I put fork tines, like this one here, on each side to kind of give me some room to be able to open these up, because I had it together, but it wouldn't open up wide enough. So that was definitely a problem. So I just got these from the dollar store, these little clips. And as I'm looking at them, I'm seeing that where the hinge is, it's raised apart from the plastic pieces that curl around. So from that, I took the fork tines and I used those to separate our forks. And so I actually did take apart a couple of these and use the spring out of them. They worked perfectly. I bought 3 or 4 different sizes, and I just ended up using one of the medium sizes. So these fork tines kind of go in between each other a little bit. It's kind of hard to get them to go straight, because if they're going to offset like right there, your clip part where you clip it with your fingers, that part is offset. So here I'm showing you all I did. So I just cut off these fork heads, rounded them off, and I took my largest pin in my shallowest nylon there, shaping block thingy. So I put it in there, and I pulled the fork head up with my hands to try and get that bend in there. So, and I bent it a couple of times. Didn't want to go too far with it because I was just adjusting, but you can kind of see where I ended up with it at. So that's how I got the small clip side, and you'll want to experiment with that to see what you like too. This is the smallest round nylon forming block in the regular bracelet block, and it fits perfectly to that. I did have to hammer up on it a little bit to get it to pull up as far as I wanted it to. But you can see there that it's almost identical. So just those 2 bends is basically what I needed to do. In the process of this, I think I bent these flat at least 4 times. So here I'm showing you just that I rounded it off, filed it down. Here's some the 2 fork tines I used. I just was barely tapping them to get them to lay flat. And right here I'm trying to set it up so that I can solder the fork tines on. And the way I have it clipped, this is my 8-inch forceps. The way I have it clipped is so that the very tips are right in the center of the fork tine, so it gets nice and even pressure all the way across. So I put a few pieces of solder on, and my flux, my spray flux, does not want to work. So I ended up having to take out the nozzle and actually just dump a ton on there with just the tube. So it's definitely fluxed. And this is the brass rings that I was trying to solder on. So this is still working on this is the second time doing this. The first time without the fork tine. And I'm trying to get them lined up to where they're going to be at the right pivot point, because that's a critical part there. If they're not at the right spot, they're not going to open up correctly. So I have my pieces on there, and our yep. So what I'm trying to do now is trying to solder on the two pieces for the other side. So I'm cutting little grooves just to get the pieces to stick here, and I'm adjusting it to try and make sure that I have my pieces to where they're not overlapping each other. And this part was kind of tedious. I'm trying to figure out how to get everything together even so that I can put that brass rod through. So this is just part of the whole learning experience. And getting closer, getting closer. It's all just experimenting until you can get things to go the way you want. And I was talking through this whole thing, but my audio decided to not work. So that's why I'm doing the voiceover. And I'm trying to heat up with my little butane torch this piece, but it's not doing the trick. So I'm jumping over to my bigger propane torch. And I'm trying to get it from underneath a little bit. So I'm soldering this with medium or easy solder, because I did the fork tine and hard solder and I didn't want to melt the brass. So I'm just running just a little bit in there, try and get it to flow. And it's taking its time, taking its time. This thing did not like to solder very well. I think I'm about to break out the other torch right now. Yeah. My acetylene torch, I have a new regulator for it, but I was missing one of the connection pieces, so I didn't have the right heat to be able to do this correctly. So now we've jumped to the next evolution, because every time I used the brass pieces, no matter what I did, the solder kept coming off. So I have a sterling silver jump ring with easy flux, and that melted a lot easier. And I'm still using my pinchers there to hold the jump ring in place. And I'm still using the little guided cutouts that I used or that I made previous. So I'm just checking to make sure that my bar is going to go through everything. So if everything needs to be perfectly lined up for that bar to work. So I'm just going back and forth and trying to make sure that all my pieces are going to be in the right place and keep the forks even. They're going to be offset a little bit, but I want to try and keep them as even as possible. I was hoping that this would work, where my charcoal block underneath wouldn't absorb so much of the heat, and maybe I could be able to get away with just my torch. So I've got my ring there. That's a better view of it. So I did 2 rings on this side of the clip, and I did 2 rings on the other side of the clip. So 4 altogether. And we'll see those here in a second. I think this one didn't take as long to flow. And you see all the arms and everything there. I went through so many different revisions and trying to make things work that it was a mess. My bench was definitely in experiment mode. This one here, I needed just a little bit more solder on it. It dropped, but the solder was mostly on one side, and I wanted to just make sure that I had enough solder to make these stay, because I didn't want to do this again. All right, so bar goes in, spring goes in, and now we fight with it for a minute to make sure everything gets in the right place. And let's just do this. We'll zoom in here a little bit, show you the rings and the process a little better close up. So the rings wanted to keep twisting out of the way, and I didn't want them to twist off like the brass pieces had. So I was being really, really careful with it. The silver solder definitely made things a lot stronger. And so what's happening right now is the rod that I'm using is so much thinner than the holes of the jump rings. So what I'm doing is I'm putting in a little brass sleeve, a little brass tube, to take out some of that gap. So you can kind of see it there on the right. I just pushed it out. But once I got that into underneath both of those jump rings, things started to really get a lot tighter and fit a lot better. So here I'm still just trying to get this. I think I'm pulling it out or trying to twist it in. Okay, yep, I got it to go through. So here's where I was seeing that it was actually working. Get the brass pieces put on both sides. And here's a close-up shot. So you can see the 2 brass tubes that I used and the jump rings. And then that spring clip was just from one of those dollar store clips that I got. And I think one of them had 4, one of them had 3. There was a big one that had just 1, but it was actually working. It was grabbing. It wasn't coming apart whenever I tried to pull it apart. So the teeth had enough curve in them. And it was actually quite springy. There was quite a bit of force coming there. I was still fine tuning the fork tines a little bit to try and get them to fit a little nicer with each other. Trying it on, but I didn't have enough hair, so that didn't work. But it didn't scratch my head, which is what I also wanted to check, to make sure there's nothing sharp or pointy to stab yourself with. And right here, disaster happens. So I didn't have enough power with my little Dremel tool, so I'm switching to my hanging Dremel, and I get this bit put in. That's a 80 grit bit, and I start to use it, and I can stop it with my fingers. So I'm running it, and everything's moving, but it's feeling weird. It looked like the collar right there had slipped off a little bit. So I'm trying to just push the black hose down into the silver end piece there. So I get it going, and I can stop it again. So something's definitely wrong. So let's try the other hand piece. And nope, that one doesn't work either. I can hold my finger over the end, and now it just totally pulled off. The silver thing pulled off of the hose. So what I'm doing is, while it's still on there, I take my pliers and I kind of open those areas up, because it's crimped on there like 5 or 6 different sides. I think it's 5 sides. So I'm just trying to open them back up. I'm just pushing on the corners to make them wider. Right there, I just kind of tapped it open a little bit. Force the thing back on there. Get it back up as far or farther than where it was originally. There's the marks and the little pinhole. Okay, so now we have this. It's working right. I'm going to take a just a screwdriver bit, and there's one little pinhole on the side that you can kind of dimple down. And so now this is all sped up, but I'm tapping on the original crimp marks. And now we can get back to work. I wasn't going to clean it, but then I'm like, you know what? I have to kind of clean it just so that it looks nice. I really did abuse these 2 forks. I am completely 100% surprised that they didn't crack or break in the process. I bent them the wrong way twice, and all the heating and cooling, I figured they would break, but they were still pretty malleable. Get off a little bit of some solder that I spilled. Take it to the buffer. I did the fiber wheel first, and then I did just the regular. I don't know which polish it is or which cutting polish. I ran out of black, so now I'm on the next hardest one. Okay. And making sure that I just try and get as much as I can without it getting yanked out of my hands. All right. So I just finished cutting this little brass bar. There's my spring. There's the 2 brass tubes. They're not cut down. I just left them. I'll use them in another project possibly. But we have all of our pieces. Everything's shiny. Okay, let's put this thing together. We get our pieces matched up here. You can see me shaking quite a bit again. Get the focus set. All right, so we're going to put in our brass tubing first. And that really helped keep everything aligned and where it's supposed to be. With just that little bar in there, there was way too much left-right movement, and I was afraid that that was going to rip off the jump rings, because that's what was happening before with the little brass pieces. So we'll get this other one in. Here we go. And I'm trying to get them in to kind of a middle space, but I still have enough room for my spring. So I've tapered this bar down on the tip, and the spring needs to go, it can only go one way and still work. So that's the direction it needs to go. So I have just enough room to fit it in there. So I've got it through. Now I need to push it down and get it into the other brass tube. And there we go. Trying to even everything out. And it works. Yay! I'll tweak the fork tines a little bit more. Kind of get them to shoot off each other a little bit so they close better. And there we go. So we have our first fork hair tie. If I was going to do it again and make more, I would get, I think it was a 3mm jump ring, and I would get flat bar stock to be able to solder across and give you a level space. So the fork tines I crossed back and forth, so the little end was against the big end on the other side, so they kind of balanced out, but the flat bar would be a lot better. And just a brass rod to go through, and you would have everything just all set. It would all be nice and tight. I'm just kind of rounding out the fork tines a little bit. Like I said, they went through a lot of abuse, and I'm just trying to get them to close a little nicer. Using my large graduated pliers to try and even out where they're touching in the middle. And there we go. We have it made. If you guys haven't yet, please like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell so you see whenever we have new videos. We'll have a bunch of new stuff coming out soon. I'm finally getting back into making the videos and editing. Takes a little longer when I have to voice over the whole thing, but this was a fun little project. I probably won't be making any more of these just because I don't have the right parts to do it, but it was a lot of fun, and it is something that can easily be made. I think I made this, I think it took me about 3 hours from all of the prototyping, bending everything back, putting things where they're supposed to be, trying to figure out what I had on hand to get things to work. So I could probably get this down to less than an hour if I had the right parts for it. But it was a fun project. It will probably go up on my shelf. I'm thinking of making some place of putting all of my projects up. On YouTube, I'm going to start a series of challenges or things people haven't seen before, requests. I have a whole list of things from whenever we were doing shows that people ask that I never got around to making. So that's going to be a lot of fun to do those little videos and to be able to get feedback from you guys. So I just wanted to share this video. I will stick the ending on here, and I hope that you guys all have a great day. If you're new to our channel, please hit subscribe. Also, click the bell and select all so you get all of our updated videos as soon as they come out.